Hi, everyone. Welcome to Washington Focus with your host, Spencer Pauly, here with the Center Square's Washington State reporter, Carlene Johnson. Now, Carlene, you had a story recently that's kind of blowing up on social media a bit. Congratulations, but it's not great news. It's not great news. But basically, what we have here is a group of Washington State Republican senators are calling for the repeal of a state law. Now, that law we're talking about is the Keep Washington Working Act. Now, I'm sure a lot of people know about it, but in case viewers don't, essentially, this law restricts local law enforcement from aiding in federal immigration enforcement. Now, this has been flagged as a sanctuary jurisdiction law, and this is something that the Trump administration is trying to tackle and is threatening to cut federal funding to these sanctuary jurisdictions. This law right here has the state of Washington on the list, along with the city of Seattle, who has their own Keep Washington Working Act of their own. So let's get into this, Carlene. Basically, let's start off with what are some of the most problematic aspects of this law that Republicans are flagging right now?
Right. So as you mentioned, these four Republican senators, and I spoke to Senator Phil Fortunato, who represents Auburn and some parts of Pierce County as well. But his folks reached out to me and said, forward me a copy of the letter that they had sent to Governor Bob Ferguson saying, okay, we've now got the Trump administration coming after us because we're not cooperating with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Please take this seriously. As you mentioned, millions, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars on the line to be withheld, because it's not just withholding federal funds for one certain thing like transportation or something else. I mean, there are so many different chunks of federal funding that our state is reliant upon that are now, there's the threat of withholding those entirely if we don't cooperate. So Senator Fortunato's office reached out to me and I was able to interview him, and he said, what gives, basically? We've got this, keep Washington working, keep these families together act, but it's in direct contradiction with federal law at this point. So this is where it got really interesting, Spencer, because Senator Fortunato reached out to a policy advisor in the governor's office very early this year. It was in February, and said, okay, so we know this directive is coming down from the Trump administration that says we have to cooperate. And if these criminals are being released from Department of Corrections, we need to alert ICE, right? So they can come get these guys before they're released back into the community. What he was told, Senator Fortunato's office was told at the time, was that there were 2, maybe 3 individuals that were serving in the Department of Corrections. So in the prison system, not in county jails, not in the King County facilities, right? That he said 2 to 3. So Fortunato went back then to Department of Corrections and Homeland Security and said, really, that seems like a super low number. Like, really, how many of these guys are in custody? And at the time, and this was based on statistics ending through 2024, they said 310 individuals.
That's
large discrepancy.
Yeah, huge.
Right.
I mean, why such a gap? That's just like the biggest question that comes to my brain when I read the article and I see that, 2 versus 310. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, and then this is where the story got even all the more interesting. Excuse me. So then I went back to communications person Brianna Aho in Governor Ferguson's office and said, so here's the numbers that Senator Fortunato got. And let me just highlight a couple of these, because this isn't, and I think I wrote this in my article, Spencer, that, people always say, like, we're going to lose all of our folks that work in our hotels, all of our landscape workers, whatever, if we, deport illegal aliens. These folks, these 310 folks are in Department of Corrections custody, at least up through 2024. 130 of them were in there for sex offenses, rape, very serious sex crimes, 94 for homicide, 38 for assault on various serious degrees, 22 for robbery, 12 for drugs, 8 for weapons possession, 2 for kidnapping, and then we had 111 for DUI, fraud, forgery, and arson. So these are very serious crimes. As I mentioned, I went back to Brianna Aho in Ferguson's office and said, what gives? Your guys' policy advisor told Fortunato there were 2 or 3. We found out from DOC and Homeland Security that we've actually got 310. The response I got from Brianna Aho in Ferguson's office was, who gave you that information and on what date? Was this an email chain? I need to know exactly who this employee was from our office. Never responded to the actual question that I raised. Why such a difference? She was more interested in finding out where I got the information, who provided the information, and on what date.
And when you talk about the information, are you talking about the listed 2 people, or are you talking about the 310?
Both. She wanted both. And I said, okay. I forwarded her the information that I got. I mean, this was basically publicly available information, right? Senator Fortunato received this information from DOC and Homeland Security. It was all on his work email. And I saw he forwarded me the direct emails. What she wanted to know on the other side of that was also who in our office said 2 or 3. Now, I don't know if that's because she knew that that was inaccurate information and they wanted to call this person out, or she wanted the dates, all that information. The follow-up story that I intend to pursue here is the fact that this policy advisor was placed on leave from Governor Bob Ferguson's office on the 1st of July. She's been placed on leave, and as of 2 days ago, this leave has been extended through at least the first part of the year. This policy advisor, Sahar Fathi, is not responding to me at this point for my request for information as to, did you ask for this leave? Because the statement that went out from the governor's office was to say, we love her. She's amazing. She's worked so hard for us. Basically, that legislative session earlier this year was very difficult for her. And so we're going to honor her leave. Well, did she ask for it, or was she pressured to take leave? Because you and I well know sometimes these folks that are suddenly placed on leave without explanation maybe didn't ask for that of their own volition, that maybe there was something else going on. And if in fact, the fact that she met with Senator Fortunato and provided information to him has any part of this leave, that's what I want to know. There's a much bigger story here that hopefully once I receive some response to my public records request, we'll find out. But for now, the big mystery is why such a discrepancy. And I think the reason why this has picked up so much traction on X and other social media, Spencer, is the fact that Washington taxpayers, forked out about $23 million to keep these 310 inmates in Department of Corrections custody and not let ICE know when these folks are being released.
Like, you just
people pissed off.
Could you just maybe explain how you came up with that $23 million figure? I know you did the math, right, Carlene?
Yeah, did the math, and I was double checking my numbers because I was like, this is a big chunk of change, and it might even be more than this because. So it's basically $75,000 per inmate per year, right? In Department of Corrections custody. This is for the staff that has to guard them. This is for their meals. This is for their health care. That's probably a low end figure. And I say that because some of these guys are older inmates as well. Of course, healthcare costs are going to be more. Also, many of them are on specialized diets, and that's going to cost more. So the $75,000 is kind of a low end estimate. And that, because that also accounts for some that are in, facilities where they're not under, they're not in major lockdown. They might have, some access to some freedoms. So that might be a lower cost estimate. That is anywhere from like 56 up to 75. Then you've got ones that are 75 upwards of $100,000 per inmate. So this was kind of an average I took. I felt comfortable using that ballpark because I didn't have specifics on a breakdown for these 310. So, but anyway, it's over $23 million a year that Washington taxpayers are paying to keep these 310. And as we mentioned, that's only the folks that are in our prison system. This isn't accounting for the folks in the King County Jail, local jails, city jails that are also, I don't have access. We don't have access to that information. So we don't know how many more there are. Certainly it's a lot more than the 310 from DOC.
Or more than 2 for sure, right?
More than 2 for sure. And again, I would love to get an explanation as to where that figure came from. Obviously Senator Fortunato went, 2 or 3 versus the 310 he found out. What gives? I'm not getting answers at this point as to that. Discrepancy.
And this all stems from, I've reported on this, Carlene, and you've mentioned in the story here, and that's, Attorney General Pam Bondi, threatened to withhold federal funds from the state, and Ferguson responded saying he's not going to budge on repealing the Keep Washington Working Act, citing that this is part of the state's values, right? This law is, he's encompassing everyone in the state. But with that being said, he calls the federal threats posturing and vowed to defend Washington's sanctuary policies. Now, I'd like to ask if you've talked to so many, lawmakers, sheriffs that, about this, issue of illegal immigration. Now, do you think there's any common ground we could find with the supporters of this act just to address these public safety concerns?
That's a really good question. And I can almost guarantee you from some conversations I've had, even off the record with unnamed lawmakers, that they intend this 2026 legislative session to go back and try and make some changes, because, their sense is it's not working and it's put us in direct contradiction with federal law. And Trump's made no secret. He's not going to let this go. So in the meantime, what do we do? Right? Because if some of the, and Senator Fortunato in our conversation brought up, like, we've got a couple of bridges, like the bridge out to Buckley that got hit by a truck a few weeks ago, and that could be out for months, if not longer. Without federal funding, without the infrastructure for projects like that, we're going to be screwed. And we've got, and that is a direct daily impact for the Washington taxpayer, not necessarily immediately out of the pocket, like, okay, I got to pay to keep this inmate in custody, even though ICE wants to know where they are. This is somebody who's going 17 miles out of their way, 2 ways a day to go around a bridge closure. And now with federal funding, in jeopardy, that bridge isn't going to get fixed. Those are impacts that, hit all of us that, maybe people don't make the direct correlation, but, those are things we have to consider. So I would certainly guess that we're going to have an effort to amend this law during the legislative session. And I hope you're right. I hope there's room for bipartisan conversation. I've been told that those conversations are already taking place, in advance, in anticipation of some pre-filed bills. So, this is one I know we're going to be following and keeping close tabs on. Meantime, federal funding is going to be withheld at this point, and we'll see what the administration does.
Carlene, it's always interesting. I've worked here for over 3 years now, and you get a glimpse of what the state session is going to be, about. What are the priorities? And it seems like this year we're really going to see a lot of talks, negotiations within state lawmakers about how do we combat potential loss of federal funding, whether that's Republicans saying, well, how about we adhere to their demands so that we can receive funding that doesn't come out of state taxpayers, or, as we see continuously from, state Democrats, that we must take a stance on our values, right? So that is something that I'm sure you'll keep in mind and look at seeing what goes on and when the upcoming session comes. And Carlene, when the time comes, I know you'll be busy, and those trips down to Olympia will be frequent, right?
My brain's already spinning thinking about legislative session, and it's still, August. So.
Yeah, we're sweltering in the heat still, but eventually you'll be in the cool chambers of Olympia.
Sitting on that cold marble floor inside the legislative building. People can start playing their little mini violins for me now.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, Carlene, keep up the great work. And to our viewers at home, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.